Good morning, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Terry Sewell. I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Tuscaloosa, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. I want to thank our colleagues for being here and joining me this morning. I'm grateful to have their support and the support of the entire House Democratic Caucus as we take action to protect our sacred right to vote. Today, as we prepare to commemorate the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday and the historic march from Selma to Montgomery, we do so at a very perilous time in our democracy. Sadly, we know that the values that guided John Lewis and those foot soldiers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge are under assault. Seemingly every day, we see new efforts to roll back our hard-fought progress, efforts to whitewash our history, and yes, efforts to make it harder for Americans to vote. Without the protections of the Voting Rights Act, those efforts are going unchecked in state legislatures across this country. In 2024, state legislators proposed at least 317 bills to make it harder for Americans to cast their ballot, and almost 20 of those bills were signed into law. Meanwhile, here in Washington, House Republicans are working hard to advance legislation that would disenfranchise millions of eligible voters, including married women and Americans with military and tribal IDs. Americans shall see these laws for what they are, an attack on our democracy and an attempt to silence the voice of the people. Long lines, closed polling stations, voter rolls are being purged, and the list goes on and on. While these new laws may not make us count how many marbles are in a jar, I have to say that modern-day efforts and modern-day barriers to voting are no less pernicious than those poll tax and literacy tests of the past. 60 years may have passed since John Lewis and those foot soldiers were bludgeoned on that bridge in Selma, but we know the fight for voting rights is just as urgent today as it was then. That's why today, with the help and support of every House Democrat, I am proud to say that we reintroduced H.R. 14, the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Our bill would restore and modernize the protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It would give us the tools we need to address modern-day voter suppression and ensure that every American can cast their ballot fairly and freely. Voting rights should not be a partisan issue. We should all agree that our democracy is strongest when every American who is eligible to vote has access to the ballot box. Let us not forget that since the passing of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act was reauthorized 5 times with large bipartisan majorities and under 3 Republican presidents, most recently in 2006 by George Bush. While my Republican colleagues have abandoned that bipartisan tradition, this Congress provides a new opportunity for them to stand alongside us as we fight for the American people and the values that John Lewis fought so bravely and so tirelessly to advance. Never did I think that 60 years after John was bludgeoned on a bridge, that the cause for which John Lewis and those foot soldiers marched would be our cause too, 60 years later. It goes to show that progress is elusive, and every generation must fight to hold on to the progress of the past and to try to advance it, or lest we lose it. Well, we here in the House Democratic Caucus, we believe fervently that John Lewis and those foot soldiers' sacrifice was not in vain. We will continue to file the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act because we know that the Shelby versus Holder decision gutted it in 2013. And since 2013, we House Democrats have filed this bill in every successive Congress, and we do so now in the 119th Congress. We do so on the wake, in the cusp of the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, of the march from Selma to Montgomery, and of Bloody Sunday. I want to thank all of my colleagues for joining me. We know, as John said, that Ours is not the fight of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is truly the fight of a lifetime. And we will stand boldly with the American people to ensure that the sacred right to vote is protected and that every American who is eligible to vote has access to the ballot box. I want to again thank all of my colleagues for joining me, and I want to bring to our podium our whip, the Democratic whip, none other than Catherine Clark. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sewell, for your work to preserve, protect, and defend the bedrock of our democracy, the right of American people to free and fair elections. We are grateful to you and to your leadership. This bill honors a man, a legend, an icon, who believed that defending the right to vote was worth getting into good trouble. It honors John Lewis's lifetime of sacrifice and courage, the only way that we can, by ensuring that it was not in vain. Let's be clear, our democracy is under attack. They are coming after the most basic rights we have as citizens. At a time when extremists are cutting people's health care, rolling back civil rights, hiking prices on working families, the most powerful tool that we have is our vote. And that's exactly why extremists are trying to strip it away. If we want to preserve government by the people, if we want to defend all that Congressman Lewis fought for, we need to take action now. The right to vote wasn't handed out. It wasn't freely granted. People rose up and claimed it, from Selma to Seneca Falls. As Congressman Lewis put it, democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part. So now it's time to do our part by demanding a vote on the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It is an honor to wage this fight alongside of all of my colleagues, many devoted pro-democracy, pro-freedom members of Congress, including our distinguished chair of the caucus, my friend, the gentleman from San Bernardino, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Whip Clark. I appreciate the Whip's leadership in helping to get every Democrat on this bill. We're here also to thank and lift up the work that Congresswoman Terry Sewell has done as a champion of this legislation. It is no small task to carry a bill named after our beloved colleague, John Lewis, and she has stepped up time and time again to make this a priority, and we appreciate her work. And that's why it's a privilege for me to be here to join my colleagues as we commemorate the 60th anniversary of John Lewis marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and honor his memory with this legislation righting a great wrong. In 2013, the politicians on the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, allowing states across this country to make it harder for people to vote. We are here today because we believe in fairness. If you have a stake in your community's future, you should be able to vote for it. The same Republicans in Congress who oppose this legislation are the ones who only accept the election outcome when they win. That is a fundamentally un-American view, and no one understood that more than John Lewis. Voting is an act of patriotism. We love our country, we want to make it better, and we want every American to have the same opportunity. Let's make our elections more fair and more accessible so that everyone has a chance to make their voice heard. Let's end Republican efforts to put up roadblocks to the ballot box, and let's remind people that voting is how we make our democracy stronger. Together, let's pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It's my privilege to introduce someone who is taking a legislative role in his capacity as chair of House Administration, a gentleman from New York, Joe Morelle. Ranking member.
Getting a promotion. We love that.
Getting ahead of yourself a little bit. Good morning. Thank you to all my not only colleagues but dear friends who are up on the dais to talk about this important legislation, and a special thank you to a colleague of mine on the House Administration Committee and a great friend whose years of leadership on this legislation is bringing it to the floor once again, and that's Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who we will all be joining in Alabama this week. I said, boy, she has a lot of work. She's tireless and has a big weekend ahead of her. But we're so grateful for her continued fight here. And as I said, thank you to Leader Jeffries, to Whip Clark, and Chairman Aguilar for their incredible leadership and commitment to the American people. And also my dear friends from New York, Yvette Clark and Grace Meng. And I do want to say a word about John Lewis. I often say, people will ask me back in Rochester, did you get to meet John Lewis? And I had the privilege of serving with him for just a couple of years. And I remember in the morning when we'd get on the floor, I'd always go over to say hello. And I'd say, good morning, Mr. Lewis, how are you? Good afternoon, Mr. Lewis, how are you? And he finally said to me one day, you know, we're colleagues. You can call me John. And I said, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Lewis. But he will always be Mr. Lewis to me. You know, I think as it's clear, House Democrats believe democracy works best when every single person participates. It's at the core of who we are. As I often say, I'm a son of Rochester, New York, a community whose history is synonymous with expanding access to the ballot box. It's also the core of who I am. Rochester is the home of Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony, two of the most passionate and well-known advocates for voting rights in American history. Frederick Douglass published the North Star newspaper at the heart of my downtown area, and we take our ties to that sacred history very, very seriously. I stand with my esteemed colleagues as we continue the fight Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony began so long ago. And today we carry the legacy of Frederick Douglass with us as we work towards our own North Star, protecting the right to vote for every single American and restoring the Voting Rights Act to its full strength. 60 years after the late Congressman Lewis led the march from Selma to Montgomery, we still remind people that the fight for free, fair, and equal access to the ballot box is not over. We stand together on the shoulders of giants to introduce this legislation, and again thank Congress Member Terry Sewell for her incredible leadership. But the effort is pursuit of bringing America closer to its foundational promise. So we're not going to back down in the fight to ensure every American has an equal say in the decisions governing their lives. We'll stand up against disenfranchisement and fight for the very bedrock of this democracy. So many of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle in all three branches of government seem to have forgotten why we need democracy in the first place. Well, we haven't, and we're going to continue that fight every single day. So thank you for the privilege of being here, and I'm honored and delighted to ask to come to the podium and follow me, the great leader of the Democratic caucus, a great leader of the Democratic members, and a dear friend from the great borough of Brooklyn, Kings County, Hakeem Jeffries.
Good morning, everyone. I thank the distinguished gentleman from the great state of New York. New York is in the building right now.
Everywhere.
But it's all being led by a great leader from Selma, Alabama, and we're so appreciative of Terry Sewell, her brilliance, her intellect, her passion, her spirit, her heart, and her soul on behalf of the American people and on behalf of our great democracy. Voting rights is central to the integrity of our democracy. It has a special place in a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Protecting the right to vote is necessary in protecting the integrity of our system of free and fair elections and a government that is truly representative of the American people. This whole notion, the idea, the experiment in self-government relates directly to the ability of all Americans to have the unfettered right to vote. But voting rights is under attack across America. Republicans, in many ways, have decided that voter suppression is an electoral strategy. That is unacceptable, unconscionable, and un-American. And we want to make voter suppression unlawful in every way possible, which is why the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is so critical. We stand behind it. We're thankful for the leadership of Terry Sewell. More than 200 Democrats are original co-sponsors of this legislation. We are unified on the issue of protecting the voting rights of every single American all across the country, and we ask Republicans to join us. Voting rights is not a Democratic issue or Republican issue, it's an American issue. And we should all stand behind the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, make sure that it passes the House, passes the Senate, can get signed into law so we can keep our great American democracy going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. We bring to the mic now another amazing Brooklynite, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Yvette Clarke.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sewell. I am Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I proudly represent New York's 9th Congressional District, which is in central and southwest Brooklyn. I want to thank my esteemed colleague, Representative Terry Sewell. Her leadership has been tremendous and unrelenting in reintroducing the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in the 119th Congress, as well as all of my colleagues assembled here, the leadership of the Democratic Caucus and the leadership of our affinity caucuses. Voting rights is and has always been the CBC's North Star. The late Congressman John Lewis said, "The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democracy." Right now, as my colleagues have indicated, that tool is under threat. At a time when our democracy is under constant siege, we must do all we can to protect the sacred right to vote. As we speak, extremist Republicans at the local, state, and national levels are running the table with every tactic in their arsenal to keep Black people from the ballot box. To date, hundreds of bills to restrict voting access have been introduced in states around the country with the aim of closing polling locations, curbing early voting, voting by mail, and imposing stricter voter ID requirements. These efforts are coordinated. They are well-funded, and they are targeting our communities. The question now is, what are we going to do to stop it? For generations, we have marched, fought, and even died for the right to vote. And it is a shame that partisan politics have brought us to this point that we cannot agree that access to the ballot box should be a right afforded to every American. Since the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was enacted, it has been reauthorized 5 times with large bipartisan majorities, most recently in 2006, as was indicated by Congresswoman Sewell, when it passed unanimously in the U.S. Senate, 98-0, and was signed by Republican President George W. Bush. We cannot and will not allow MAGA extremists to tear down our democracy. The CBC will continue to fight against the voter suppression that plagues our country and impedes access to the ballot box, particularly in Black communities. So enough is enough. Protecting Americans' access to the ballot box should not be a partisan issue. The CBC is calling on Republicans to work with Democrats to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to restore and modernize the protections of the VRAA to prevent states from erecting new barriers to the ballot box. With that, as we say, I yield back.
Thank you. I'm Congressman Adriano Espaillat, chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Thank you, Terry, our leader Jeffries, and the Democratic leadership team. One person, one vote. What a great concept of democracy, of the spinal cord of our democracy. One person, one vote. A very simple concept. My vote is just as good as anybody's vote. A rich person's vote is just as good as a poor person's vote. So this is right at the center of our ability to restore democracy every so often, every time we have an election. And so this is so important that we continue to support the one person, one vote concept that is right at the center of any chapters in history where we have seen an enhancement of democracy. So when women were given the right to vote, it was one person, one vote. When different initiatives were passed to facilitate people to vote, it was one person, one vote. So it's mind-boggling that today we see effort after effort to try to stifle, to try to put roadblocks on one person, one vote. And this, the John Lewis Voting Rights Enhancement Act, is long overdue. In the past year, at least 9 states have enacted 18 restrictive voting laws, 9 states across the country. With this troubling trend, the Voting Rights Advancement Act is more important now than ever before. Republicans are trying to roll back progress with bills like the SAFE Act, which would require Americans to provide proof of citizenship. It's already a crime to vote, and you're not a citizen. It's a felony. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The laws are already in the book. Studies have shown that 1 out of 10 adult citizens, or 21.3 million eligible voters, say they could not quickly gather their documents required under the SAFE Act. Imagine if I told you right now, go get me your passport. It's going to take you a half a day. Imagine if I tell you, go get me your citizenship papers. It will take some endeavor to do that. It's already a felony to vote if you're not a citizen. So historically, Latinos are among those disproportionately affected by voter suppression laws. It is not a coincidence that places with growing Latino populations are also seeing an increase in voting restrictions, including Arizona, Texas, Wisconsin, and Florida. Latinos are the fastest growing share of the electorate. It's a very young community. 1.4 million Latinos become legally eligible to vote every single year. More than 1 million Latino citizens turn 18 one every 30 seconds. 1 every 30 seconds. So I can count to 30 and one member of the Latino community turn 18. This is how powerful the concept of one person, one vote is. And so let's pass this bill. Our leadership, our Democratic leadership is fully behind it. It is good for America. It is good. Estamos aquí para apoyar el concepto de una persona, un voto y apoyar este proyecto de ley que nuestra colega Terry Sewell ha presentado en honor al legendario congresista John R. Lewis, que presentó este proyecto de ley para facilitarle los derechos a los votantes, tener acceso a la votación todos los años. La comunidad latina se ve directamente golpeada por restricciones de poder acceder a votar y por tal razón apoyamos el proyecto. Gracias. I yield back.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng, chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and I want to thank my friend, Congresswoman Sewell, for once again championing this bill in memory of our beloved friend and civil rights icon, the late Congressman John Lewis. And I want to thank our caucus leadership, from Leader Jeffries on, for showing such great support for this important bill. As we commemorate the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, we are reminded of the legends of the civil rights movement for people like John Lewis, Amelia Boynton Robinson, Reverend Hosea Williams, and so many others who marched at great risk to their own safety to ensure that every American could exercise their right to vote. And it is their bravery that led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a landmark piece of legislation that prohibits racial discrimination in voting. But as we've heard, this fight is far from over. The right to vote is currently under attack by anti-democratic extremists across our nation. 29 states have enacted restrictive voting laws that criminalize people who provide assistance with voter registration and deny voters multilingual ballots and translators at the polls. These draconian laws were designed to disenfranchise communities of color. Over a third of the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community has limited English proficiency, and denying multilingual support is nothing short of silencing their voices. This is not the first time our community has faced discrimination at the ballot box before. In Alabama, a city council member said of Asian American voters, if they couldn't speak good English, they possibly were not American citizens, and forced members of our community to complete a paper ballot and have their ballot vouched for by another registered voter. In Washington, an individual challenged the right to vote for 1,500 people of mainly Asian and Hispanic descent, whose names, he said, have no basis in the English language. And now President Trump has taken action to restrict multilingual support and language access for our communities, which could further disenfranchise Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander voters. We cannot let this stand, and that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act to strengthen the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and protect access to the ballot box. I'm committed to doing my part to ensure our country's system of governance by the people and for the people continues for generations to come. Thank you, and I yield back.
I want to thank all of our speakers today. What you see before you is the entire House Democratic Caucus in support of the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We know that freedom is not free, that it was paid for on the backs of many of the forefathers and foremothers who fought, died, prayed, marched for the freedoms that we all now enjoy. And it is House Democrats that stand firmly before you, knowing that the power of the vote is sacred. We are emboldened by the legacy of John Robert Lewis. We know that his fight has now become our fight. The cause of those foot soldiers 60 years ago is now our cause too, and we will be resolute and determined in our effort to make sure that we fully restore the protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. With that, I'll open it up for questions. Yes.
Two. First of all, for members of leadership here, is this going to be the first bill you take up in 2027, as back control of the House? And then secondly, on the protests side, I know leadership will counsel folks not to be disrupted. What is your response to the disruptions?
John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act will be a top priority for House Democrats because it's central to the integrity of our democracy.
We're asking questions and answering questions regarding the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the upcoming 60th anniversary of the celebrating in March. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much doing this. I'm curious on how you will plan to message around this bill, considering that Republican leadership is prioritizing the SAFE Act, which I know you mentioned. How are you planning on messaging, maybe whipping around that for members of leadership in the general context of the political climate and immigration right now?
Well, first of all, I think that it is truly telling that the entire House Democratic membership is signed on to this bill. This is clearly a priority for House leadership and for the House Democrats, period. We know that we're fighting an uphill battle, but what we know is that we can't give up. We can be mad, we can be upset, but we have to stay determined. If there's anything that John Lewis and those foot soldiers taught us, taking a page from their playbook, we have to be resolute, we have to be determined, we have to be consistent and persistent in our efforts to fight for the right to vote, and we will continue to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, since it's been 5 times that this vote has been revisited, is there anything that can be done to make it permanent so that this doesn't happen again?
Well, first it has to be passed into law. So I think what we realized in the Shelby versus Holder decision is that only Congress can actually put back the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. What the Shelby versus Holder decision said is that when we passed it in 2006, we did so under old laws or an old formula. And so what the Voting Rights Act of the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act does is it talks about a modern day formula with a look back of 25 years. So we're looking back 1997 and going forward. We're not looking back to the 60s or 70s. And we still see rampant voter suppression. It's running amok now that the Shelby versus Holder decision has gutted a key provision. That provision allowed for the Justice Department to pre-clear laws, state laws, before they became into effect. So we know that we have work to do, and we're doing that work. We're very confident that if we continue to be persistent in our efforts, we not only have we introduced it 5 times, this is the 6th time, but we passed it twice. We passed it twice out of the House. And so we know that the groundswell of public sentiment matters, and we're appealing to the American public to continue to join with us in this fight for better protections for voting rights. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Several House Democrats have said on some other legislative priorities that it just takes 3 House Republicans to join you all on advancing some of the House Democratic priorities. Is this a bill that you view as 3 Republicans joining you all to advance something that you say is so sacred, such as voting rights? And also, can you give us a preview of what folks can expect to see in Alabama this weekend as well?
Well, we're obviously, the slim majority that exists in the House for House Republicans does mean that if we can pick off 3 Republicans to join us in this effort, and frankly, this is what this press conference is an appeal to our Republican colleagues to join us in our effort to fight for protections of voting rights. I look forward to welcoming not only members of Congress, but ordinary Americans. If anything, what happened on Bloody Sunday taught us is that ordinary Americans working together collectively can achieve extraordinary social change. John Lewis was 27 years old when he, on a backpack, and he and Hosea Williams and others led that march from Selma to Montgomery. What happened on Bloody Sunday was a travesty, and the whole world watched as Black Americans simply, peacefully marched across a bridge to aggrieve their government for the right to vote, a simple right to vote, which is a right of citizenship in this country. And so this Sunday, I look forward to welcoming our Leader Jeffries, our caucus chair, so many who are standing here, leaders in our caucus, but also ordinary Americans as we gather to pay commemoration and honor to the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Faith in Politics, which John Lewis started many years ago, will be leading a delegation of 300, including 40 members of Congress and senators, to Selma, Birmingham, and Montgomery. And on Sunday, look forward to having a commemorative march led by Jubilee, which is an organization, a group based out of Selma that has been doing this year after year after year after year. We look forward to welcoming folks to churches in Selma, And we fully expect, as we did with the 50th, to have a commemorative march of thousands of people crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. A full show of support for our democracy. Yes.
Quick follow-up on his question. Yeah, you only need 3 Republicans to pick off to have this particular legislation passed, and you have to really appeal to those Republicans given the slim majority. And condolences to Mr. Turner's family. Absolutely. Now, you guys may have to work a little harder given the time of the special elections. That being said, given what happened last night, Republicans are very angry about the behavior. You had the kid who overcame cancer, you had the widow and the son of the slain officer, the hostage from Russia who just came over, and you only had very few Democrats who, clapped and so on and so forth. And Republicans are saying that Democrats don't want to work with them. So how do you expect to really appeal to Republicans after the behavior last night, if you want them to come over to your side on this particular legislation?
Well, frankly, this is not just about appealing to Republicans. It's about taking the case to the American people. I think the American people do understand how important the right to vote is for every citizen of this great state, great nation. And so this is more than just about them. It really is about making a public appeal, as well as an opportunity for all of us to stand strongly and resolutely in our efforts to fight for a greater democracy. I don't know if our leadership has anything else to add to this conversation. I think I'm doing pretty well.
Let's just talk for a moment about the 100 minutes that we saw yesterday that was not focused on the American people, that there was never assertion, in fact, laid the groundwork for cutting Social Security, that continues this path of cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare, cutting Medicaid, cutting veterans' benefits in this country. We did acknowledge, we always acknowledge, my guest to the State of the Union is a mom fighting for her 4-year-old who has a brain tumor that is rare. You know why she was there and why our hearts go out and are grateful that child that was brought, that we honored last night, survived? Because he had research that makes, when it's not a rare disease, when it's your child. And what are we seeing? What are they clapping for? They are clapping for devastating cancer research, Alzheimer's research, diabetes research, in order to give tax cuts to billionaires. So I really don't want to hear about decorum. I think that is important in order to get the message to the American people. But the message from my colleagues and the President of the United States was clear. And it builds on the very SAVE Act that was brought up earlier. When it comes to voting rights, they will trick and mislead the American people in order to restrict it. That's what the SAVE Act does. It is built on a false premise that there are non-citizens voting in large numbers that are swaying elections. That is a complete lie, and they know it. And what is the answer to that? Make it harder for women in this country to vote who changed their names because they got married. That is voter suppression wrapped up in some sort of immigration argument. So I am angry today. I am angry what I saw, that President of the United States, who ran and had people vote for him because he said he was going to cut their costs, he was going to make sure they had a chance at the American dream, has come in with an unelected, richest man on earth and taken a chainsaw to everything we care about, everything the American people put their trust in him to do. It is a betrayal. It is a betrayal. So let's not talk about decorum when the plot is exposed and reiterated every single day. You take people's health care, you take our veterans' benefits, you take funding for our public schools, and you do it all of it, to give a tax cut to the very wealthiest people who won't even notice it, but whose greed knows no bounds.
Amen. So again, I just want to thank everyone and really welcome the world to Selma this weekend. We look forward to the 60th anniversary as an opportunity not only to remember, but to reflect on what took place there and to rededicate ourselves to the cause for which John Lewis and those foot soldiers marched. I look forward to welcome all of the world to Selma, and I want to thank my colleagues for joining me in helping to reintroduce the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Onward and upward we go.
Thank you.